If Verizon refused to sell you a phone based on who they thought you were going to vote for, nobody would think that's okay. How is what Twitter did effectively any different? And then when you add the government component, the White House pressure, the regulators effectively breathing down their neck, the FBI breathing down their neck or colluding with them. I mean, the whole thing was rigged. It was a scam. Third hour of the Clay and Buck Show is underway right now, and so is the latest drop of the Twitter files, which are out there right now. And, you know, I think it was important. We just spoke to Bill O'Reilly in the last hour. 18 New York Times bestseller, because, you know, you got to say it, or else we want to give credit where it's due. 18 New York Times bestseller. He's got a new book out. We had him on, but he mentioned that the story here about Twitter is that social media companies actively colluded to give Joe Biden the election. Because remember, it's not just Twitter. It's Twitter, Facebook, Google, YouTube, TikTok, you name it, all of them. They're all in on this together. Even Amazon. Don't ever forget, when push came to shove in 2020, and it did, Amazon kicked Parler off of its servers. It wasn't even, hey, we're going to abuse terms of service here and shut down some accounts. It was, hey, you no longer have a business because, you know, this is like if you're running a potato chip business and the company supplying you with potatoes was like, no more for you. I mean, you're done. There's nothing else to be done at that point. And that was the lengths they're willing to go to not only help Biden, understand, they helped Biden by lying. And make no mistake about it, Clay and I are as dialed in on this as anybody. The 51 intelligence professionals who lied to help Joe Biden, yeah, it's odious, but that was what they were meant to do. That was their whole purpose. We all knew they were lying, but they were trying to fool just enough of the country that Joe Biden would be able to win that election. And it really feels like the election in that regard wasn't held from a free speech perspective. It was held under some degree of duress and false pretenses. Duress from the threatened riots that were coming from the left, as we all recall. And then we have now this, the latest from Barry Weiss. Clay, there's a lot, just to be clear to everybody. I think she's had a 40-tweet thread so far. And you're seeing the internal deliberations here of the actual banning of Donald Trump from Twitter, right? That's what this really all comes down to. And what keeps coming up, this is very similar to what you see with Democrat mainstream media bias or corporate media bias, where they don't ever take into account that they are partisans in their thinking. They just believe they're the good guys and gals, and whatever they desire is whatever is ethical, right? Whatever emotionally satisfies them in the moment is what somehow is the ethical, journalistic, and business practice to pursue. Anything really stick? I'm looking through this. It goes into some of the world leaders' reactions to Trump being banned. But Clay, anything particularly noteworthy so far in Twitter? This Twitter dump part 5, right? It's tough to keep up.
So here's what I would say is, I think, particularly noteworthy. The Twitter executives recognized that Trump had not violated their terms, that even in an aggressive definition, he had not incited violence, not even in a coded way. But this Vijaya Gad, who was Twitter's head of legal policy and trust, asked whether there was a coded incitement to violence. And they then said, if you interpret the phrase American patriots, that he was inciting violence. And here's where the final decision is made. And I think this is crazy. They basically convinced themselves that Trump was Hitler. And I'm reading directly. Things escalate from here. This is in public unveiling of the decision to ban Donald Trump on Twitter. Members of the team came to, quote, view him, meaning Trump, as the leader of a terrorist group responsible for violence and deaths, comparable to the Christchurch shooter or Hitler. And on that basis and on the totality of his tweets, he should be deplatformed. Now, this is important because what it represents is the evolution from focusing on an individual based on his own acts, as now Trump's words on Twitter are comparable to a New Zealand shooter who killed many people and Adolf Hitler. And I got to give credit here because this is fairly significant, and I do think we should have some positives here. Many different world leaders immediately spoke out about this, and we were talking about this off air, Buck, and I had forgotten, and I think these world leaders deserve credit. Emmanuel Macron said, quote, he didn't want to live in a democracy where the key decisions were made by private players, which is well said. Angela Merkel in Germany said that the suspension was problematic and said freedom of opinion is of, quote, elementary significance. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who's currently in prison in Russia, said that Twitter's act was an unacceptable act of censorship. And so I think those world leaders, France, Germany, and the opposition leader in Russia, all deserve some credit for, in the immediate aftermath, saying what Buck, you and I and many other people were saying was this was an unjustifiable act of censorship. Trump did not, based on all of this evidence being shared, actually violate the Twitter terms of service. And Twitter set the precedent. There's also in this discussion many different examples of world leaders. The Ayatollah said that Israel must be exterminated. That tweet wasn't edited. He still has his account. Many other world leaders.
This was all, we're kind of bringing it full circle here, Clay. What I said about principle is applicable once again. If you have a, quote, principle that gives you whatever you want whenever you want it, that's situational ethics, you could call it at best. That's somebody who changes what's right and wrong based on what they want it to be in the moment. And that's really the history of all of these Twitter determinations, and specifically about the president of the United States. They start from the premise of Trump is awful. He's basically Hitler. He's going to destroy the country. How do we, under our existing rules, justify taking some action against him? It is, in a sense, a corollary of Lavrenti Beria, the head of the Russian secret police, saying, you show me the man and I'll show you the crime. Except in this case, it's not a criminal statute, obviously. It's a terms of service violation, but the same mentality persists. And that's what you're seeing from the Barry Weiss release today. And also just, I mean, you know, I think it was Alex Berenson who pointed this out. It's a private company. They can do what they want. Well, not actually if they're engaging in fraud. Yeah. And telling people, for example, you know, if I contracted with FedEx, right, Federal Express, that they're going to send out I'm sending fundraising letters. I'm a political candidate and I'm sending fundraising letters via FedEx, which would be ruinously expensive, but everyone, whatever. Everyone understands what I'm saying. And every time my staff gave them something to send out, they threw it, they threw it in the trash, or they threw it, let's say, in a bin and held it for 6 months. Oh, sorry, it's a little too hard for us to get it out there. Nobody would think that was okay. Berenson said if Verizon refused to sell you a phone based on who they thought you were going to vote for, nobody would think that's okay. How is what Twitter did effectively any different? And then when you add the government component, the White House pressure, the regulators effectively breathing down their neck, the FBI breathing down their neck or colluding with them. I mean, the whole thing was rigged. It was a scam. I mean, there was something deeply unethical about how the 2020 election was conducted. And I do think we're allowed to recognize and need to recognize that. That's what's going on right now. And I also think, unfortunately, the only remedy is we have to win the next time. We have to think of how we win.
I think that's very true. I also want to flag this because I think it's important. Number 7 here from this unspooling of the 5th example of the Twitter files. There were dissenters inside Twitter, and I'm reading from number 7. Maybe because I'm from China, said one employee on January 7th, I deeply understand how censorship can destroy the public conversation. And you hear and see this very rarely, Buck, but to their credit, as they are unveiling these internal deliberations, there is a tiny minority of people that are willing to speak out against the vast tide of agreement, this mob that wants to ban Trump, this left-wing mob. And what I would point out here, and I think this is important, all organizations need diversity of thought far more, in my opinion, than they need diversity of appearance. Because this cosmetic diversity idea, which has taken root in our country, that we want people who all look different but think the same. What really matters is people thinking differently. Imagine what the debate might have been in Twitter, Buck, if it were representative of the country and half of the people had been Trump supporters and half of the people had been Biden supporters. I think it's very unlikely that this bureaucracy would have moved to begin to make bans. And so this is an example, I think, of a company being captured. There may have been a lot of different colors. There might have been a lot of different races and sexes and everything else. But when everybody thinks the same, you reach a bad result without diversity of thought.
And you can see the constant justifications and pseudo justifications offered up within Twitter about the banning of Trump, as well as all this other stuff we've seen, the shadow banning that was very real, the censoring of accounts and even ideas that were correct. This it all feels very totalitarian, and it is, because wokeness is ultimately a totalitarian ideology. It is about everything and anything. There's no escape from it, and it's never enough. That's another component of it, which is also true in a totalitarian society. You cannot bend the knee enough. You cannot use enough pronouns. You cannot undermine and abandon enough of our own history and Western civilization to placate them. It must always seek more targets to destroy and undermine. And I think Elon Musk sees this. I mean, in a sense, the richest man in the world got red-pilled by wokeness. And I knew we were looking for something, that something had really happened, because I think it was on the Babylon Bee podcast. And remember, it was a joke made by the Babylon Bee that really pushed the acquisition of Twitter forward by Elon, and it was a joke that was rooted in the most basic truth. Rachel Levine is a man. Yes. We all know this. And we could talk, by the way, about the former Navy SEAL who transitioned and is now transitioning back to being a man. What does that say about, everyone has to live their truth? Well, the truth can change of your gender. So then how much of a truth is it really? There's a lot to discuss in that. But Clay, Elon recognized that there is a viciousness, that these are vicious people wrapping themselves in false virtue. That's what he said in that Babylon Bee interview. And it is so true. And that is the cancer within our society. And I know that people are saying, well, it's just Twitter. No, it is exposing this. It is laying bare the woke left-wing authoritarian mentality for everyone to see in all of its heinousness and contradictions and dishonesty.
And it is going to be one hell of a battle to win. But 75 to 80% of the American public hates the woke. But their power is so deeply ingrained in so many of these industries, big tech, advertising, that you really have to go and root it out and defeat them and drag them kicking and screaming into the light of day. And that's why these Twitter revelations are so incredibly important. And that's what's going on right now.